We really appreciate you coming to join today as Würth Additive Group and Arburg announce our exciting partnership in the world of additive manufacturing. My name is AJ Strinquist. I'm the CEO of Würth Additive Group. Next to me is Jerry. Let him introduce himself, but we're really excited to have some time with you today to talk not only about ourselves, but about some of the new solutions we'll be bringing to customers. And with that, I'll hand it to Jerry.
Jerry Bavarian here with Arburg, and I run the U.S. additive organization here. Really excited to be partnered up with the Würth Group. Hey, Jerry, back to you.
Sure. No, and with our time today, really we want to concentrate on introducing. Both companies are very long-standing. Both have very well entrenched and loyal customer bases where we think, hey, let's give a bit of background of both companies, and then why did we choose to work together, and then we can dig into a little bit about some of the innovation that customers have already been utilizing and seeing with the Freeform platform. So Würth Additive Group is just one company within the Würth Group. It's the world's largest industrial goods supplier, so nuts, bolts, clips, clamps, chemicals, safety supplies. And about 4 years ago, we started to utilize additive manufacturing or 3D printing more and more in our day-to-day business. We were helping people with product development. We helped them with line down issues, product development, or replacing SKUs on their production floor with a 3D printed variant. As you look around, all of the black dots on the map are where we have a 3D trained specialist. The vast majority of them are degreed engineers who are really made to work with all of the red dots, who is our core salesmen and women who are supporting our clients every day out in the field. We act as a geek squad, so to say, for the greater Würth world, and that really allows us to help everybody from, we have everybody from potato chip manufacturers to cattle farms to very large automotive OEMs using us as a supplier and trusted partner as they integrate an additive program. As we look at it, what we brought to the table to all of those men and women who are out helping OEMs today is by really concentrating on problem parts. Is when we looked at Würth's offerings, our skill set is really in those high run commodities where we can use our logistics network, our warehousing, and our connections to drive down the cost and keep the space on your floor at a minimum while keeping your cash flow high and your cost in line with the quality. As we service customers, you start to get further out where the quantities aren't as high, and you started to get a lot more labor associated with managing those parts for both us and our clients. Those were historically problem parts because they were not easily replaced with traditional manufacturing. That could be that it was very complex geometry. That could be that it required tooling that maybe you don't want to reinvest in tooling if you only need a small amount, or maybe there's minimum order quantities that really doesn't make sense with your level of consumption. And that's where we're plugging in additive, is in those low run specials, those pain in the butt parts, where as you look across your total SKUs, those are usually the parts where it might be one vendor for one part number or one vendor for a couple part numbers, and all of that adds to your administration costs in your inventory programs. And so we attack it through the total cost of ownership. Is we know that every time someone has to click a button, touch a box, or get in a car, that's little fingerprints of gold. That's little bits of money all over the place that your company is subsidizing. So as we look at ways of cutting out a few steps in that process, we view that as little fingerprints of gold that are now not being transferred into an outside service or a laborious process. It's going directly back into your checking account. And so as we kind of attack those oddball parts, there's not one machine for one machine for every job. Similar to a machine shop, there isn't just one piece of equipment throughout the facility. There's numerous to maximize your efficiency. And I think that really leads in to why we're talking with Arburg is we want to tackle as wide a range of problems as possible, because we do have customers from potato chip manufacturers to cattle farms to OEMs to space agencies, where one technology and one approach is not going to do the job for everyone. And that's when, with our goal of implementing digital inventory programs, we start to look at, well, what tools do they need in the toolbox? And that's really where the Freeformer stands alone in terms of being able to, the flexibility and the creativity that we're being able to see from customers. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Jerry.
Thanks, Adrian. We wanted to highlight a little bit about the pedigree of the company. And what you can see here is Arburg's facility in Würth, Germany. And this is where we run the corporate headquarters out of. It's also where we make all of our systems. So that is our production facility. We do almost everything in-house. It was quoted to me when I did my first walkthrough there that 85 to 90% of all the components on every system that we make, from injection molding systems to our additive systems, are all made in that facility. The company itself has been around now for almost 100 years. And we started focusing on plastics processing in 1956. As you can see there on the top left, we have a shot of a very nice hand press injection molding system, first of its kind. And you can follow the years there and the different pictures. You'll notice the different colors. It looks like gray are machines. You'll see the electrical components of the different computers and computerization of things as dark gray. And then where you see the yellow, that's the Freeformer. So the Freeformer was originally introduced in 2013. Here in the US, we started shipping in 2015. And we actually introduced a new larger system in 2018. And we'll give you a little bit of insight into all of that in just a time. So when we talk about the Freeformer, there's quite a few unique advantages to this technology. So the first thing that we look at, and this is really what helps separate us from the pack, is the fact that, yes, it is an open material system, and there are some open material systems out there, but we combine that along with the fact that we utilize injection molding grade pellets. So as I showed you in the slide before that, we specialize in plastics processing, and we've been doing it since the 50s. And we took that expertise and we used that expertise to create a new style of 3D printer, one that uses real production grade thermoplastics, not filaments, not powders, but the same material that you're going to put into an injection molding machine and get your production parts made out of. Now, those materials can be rigid or they can be flexible. We've actually been doing some experimenting, as you'll see a little bit later, with some powders and some very unique things, even drugs. Now, along with that, because we're using commonly available pellets, the material cost is really low, extraordinarily low. If you compare it across the additive landscape, you're going to find that we are a few points compared to normal 3D printing material. I like to say, if you're looking at traditional FDM, where you might be spending $2, $3, $4 a cubic inch for material, we're looking at more like $2, $3, $4 a pound for material.
And you can't undersell that either, Jerry. I mean, that jump between additive plastics and traditional, injection molding plastics, it's that increase in that additives that you have to bring into it to make it go through a filament or something like that. I mean, people are, you mentioned your history of 60, 70 years with injection molding. So people are walking from one machine, taking a scoop and going to the printer.
That's the basic idea, yeah.
And I think that if you're in that, it may sound somewhat, every day, but I think for people that are in additive, that power of going to an industry that's decades old, and being able to pull from that product portfolio, that material portfolio is pretty powerful when you're trying to recreate old parts or keep your material specs the same and things like that, right?
We think so, and especially when you're looking at production, right? Keeping the cost of material low allows you to look at it, whether you're doing injection molding now or you have a brand new part that you just introduce into the market. It allows you to look at our additive solution as a potential production solution. And the last thing I'll mention is the part densities. We can vary the densities of the part. We can do a lot with customizing the part. We can push it towards the maximum and create parts that are very close to injection molded quality, or we can go fully in the other direction and customize parts with different densities, which you can see here, where we've got a part that the ring around the outside is printed 100% density. On the inside, you have this very, very flexible, soft filter-like material at about 15% density. And then the cool part about this is it's a very flexible part to start with. And since we're using real thermoplastics, it's very durable. So we'll talk a little bit about the process itself. I mentioned that we used our plastics processing knowledge. And when I say we used it, I mean, we really exploited it. So I like to look at our technology as half an injection molding system and half a 3D printer. And what you'll see is if you start at the top right, we've got a standard hopper where we load our pellets in. It falls down into a screw and barrel, just like a molding system. And that screw is going to push that material forward. And as it's doing that, that material is melting and that's plasticizing. And then we're pushing that into our 3D printing half of it, where a piezo actuator is opening and closing a nozzle. And as we open and close that nozzle, we create micro droplets. And that's really another huge advantage of this technology is we are printing a thermoplastic and we are pushing out a nozzle, but it's not a filament. It's actually a micro droplet. And the droplets seep into each other layer after layer very nicely, creating that compact, dense part.
I mean, so I'm used to, you know, a lot of people will probably have the FDM where it's the hot glue or Elena, and that has those layers stacking almost kind of like Lincoln logs or something, where that seam on top of each other. And that's also historically where 3D printed parts break, right? Is in between the seam. Is this seems almost like if, instead of building a log cabin or a log wall, you're stacking rocks to make that wall, right? So individual drops are being nested together, and you're changing the space between those to change the density as well.
Exactly.
So that's a lot. That if you can tell, that's a whole lot of kind of customization and creativity. Where think of it with something like what you have on like a shoe insole, where the actual foot lies might have a slightly softer density, and up around the cup, you might go a little firmer to help drive the heel back down into the cup of the shoe. So again, by going from that laying one on top of each other in this nesting, is the creativity goes a lot wider than what you might see with your typical printer as well.
Log cabin to stone wall.
There you go. I'm a simple man.
And here's a great depiction of that. The block right here is what you're seeing there. We printed different densities. I know it's very hard to tell on the screen, but different densities in each of these blocks. But to AJ's point, really the simplicity in it, all we're doing is spreading those droplets out to create a lesser density part. And if we go in the other direction, what we see here, and we've got a video on the right, which I will explain as it's going through. So what you see here is a block that was printed in a polycarbonate. This was a Covestro material called Macrolon. And I will throw out the disclaimer that this part was polished on both sides to attain that clarity. It did not come out of the machine that way. We like to stay honest. But the reason we did that is not to show a clear part, but to show you the inside of the part and to show you how dense that part is and that there's no air bubbles in there. And that video that was operating on the right-hand side, that's actually a CT scan of that part. And what we were looking at, all of that black, that's material going all the way down. And we were basically looking for air bubbles that we didn't find.
Well,
So as we move forward, we've talked a little bit about the technology and what the technology can do, and everything we've shown so far has been single material. So let's take a big step forward. I mentioned towards the beginning that in 2018, we released a larger system. Our larger system actually has 3 nozzles instead of 2 nozzles. And 3 nozzles allows us to do multi-component parts, multi-material parts. It can be rigid and rigid, rigid and flexible, flexible and flexible. I like to say, as long as those materials play nice together within the heated envelope as they're printing, then we can print them together. So a great example would be if we were looking at something like an ABS and maybe an Ultra, where the oven range is so different there that it might not make sense to put them together. But we look at an ABS and a TPU, or a PC ABS and a TPU, or we've even done ABS and PC. Those, we can all print those together. And really what it's looking like is we've got a black rigid component with a red TPU or flexible gasket built right into it.
And I think some people might go, well, oh, gaskets, what? I think it is you're coming off that machine, to me, is looking as the operator, is you're getting, one is with your proprietary process, is that's seating very firmly against your base plastic.
Yeah.
So you're getting a true airtight seal where, you know, for instance, on a typical gasket, you might stick a fingernail under it and pop it off.
Mm-hmm.
When it's impregnated into that base layer of plastic like you have there, you've got a much more kind of robust solution when you're doing those custom electronics, those low run specials, where you don't want an extra SKU in the gasket to fall off and then they have to try to source it. If it's built right there onto the part and it's not robustly made and it's going to last, now you have one SKU to deliver that customer to managing your inventory.
So that actually reminds me of another point, which is one of the main advantages of 3D printing is being able to take an assembly of parts that you would normally produce each component singularly and pack that all into one assembly that can be printed all together, thereby reducing all of those SKUs into one. But another interesting advantage that the Freeformer can bring you is when we're molding parts and we're doing overmolding, the materials need to be compatible. That's not necessarily the case for the Freeformer, because when we design the part, we use 2 incompatible materials that normally wouldn't stick together, and we can design in mechanical fasteners so that the 2 materials are actually mechanically joined together via different geometry, even if they weren't sticking together. So it opens up a whole new range of things you can start doing.
Interesting.
Some other interesting and unique abilities, and let me grab a great example we've got here. So I used to get asked a question throughout my career when working with different technologies: can I 3D print on something? And I never had a good answer, unfortunately, until now. And hopefully you can see this okay, and I'll just move it around a bit. But what this is a black aluminum plate that we 3D printed PPE directly on. And this was fairly easy. We actually created a fixture for this, put it onto our printing plate, bolted this onto the printing plate, and then printed directly on it. And this type of flexibility is what is brought to you by being able to have that open system with the ability of running materials, but also the software tied with it that really allows you to manage every bit and spec on that system to make it do what you want. And whether that's printing on something, or that's adding an insert into printing, or adding robotics to make a lights out 3D printing, manufacturing, and assembly set, that could all be done with a Freeformer. And in fact, Arburg creates a lot of robotics, which we call turnkey systems for our molding system, and we can do the same thing for the Freeformer.
I think there's even videos online of some of that being showcased.
There certainly are. Yeah. So when we start thinking about applications, these are some of the applications that seem to boil to the top of a lot of the customers and companies we work with. I'll give you a second to take a look at some of these. If we were to separate them, I would say we're probably looking at commercial and medical. Most of these being around functional prototyping, being able to use the material that the company needs to create the parts they're looking for.
If you're going to do R&D on parts, you should be printing in the material you're going to go to mass production with.
Why start with a different material, come up with a form, and then have to go create soft tooling or aluminum mold just to get that same form in the material? Let's cut that two-process system down to one process.
They need to trial it on the Freeform, then take it to an Arburg injection molding. So they need to probably, gotcha.
There you go. So let's jump in. The last few slides that we have here, we've done a handful of case studies, and I grabbed a couple of interesting ones just to showcase these hot applications, stuff that I think is just, it's really cool and interesting. So what we have here, this is our first story, and all of these case studies are available either on our website or also on the Würth website. And this is a story about a robotic end-of-arm gripper. And the story is interesting to me because we have a part, and it's a simple handle. It's used as a handle inside of metal panels that are all over our molding systems. And it's not a complex design. However, it's very smooth on the inside, if you're able to see that, and it has an angle on the inside that there's really no good gripping surfaces. So in order to produce this part, of course, we injection mold it, and we injection mold it in-house on our old molding systems, our own molding systems. But we just had a pin injecting it out into a box. And we would collect the parts, and then we'd have a person come in every so often, every couple hours, remove the box of parts, take the screws, throw them away, take the handles, and put them into storage. And it was working fine, but we couldn't run it overnight, and we couldn't run it over the weekend, and we really wanted to create a hands-off process. But no matter how we thought about this, there was really no way to get a gripper inside and grab this. The surface just wouldn't run to it. So when we introduced the Freeformer, our tooling group had an idea, and they created a custom part, which, if you can see here, this is a multi-material tool. And we've got some lines here, air lines, and inlets and outlets, and then, of course, the connection to the robot. But what would happen is, as we push air in, we've got some flexible areas here. The tool will go in, we push air inside, those flexible areas would puff out and grip the part, and we pull the part out, bring it over to a conveyor belt, aim it down, take the air off, and the handle would drop right out. And we were able to create a tool to automate a process that we weren't able to do it any other way.
No, and that's where for me is when you see that dual material or multi-material that's not the craziest thing, but the bonding, the performance of a multi-material part to the point where you are putting a set amount of PSI to essentially inflate an airbag, which then pushes against the side of it, is to have that going through repetition is different. Because I think a lot of people, when they talk multi-material, they probably had multicolored FDM prints or something similar. And that bonding's not the same. That performance that you have of connecting those two different substrates is what makes that difference to me. It's a huge differentiator.
Yeah, it's a great point. So moving on to our next story, this is all about prototyping, the power of prototyping. And a great story towards the beginning of COVID. Arburg in Würth, Germany, wanted to help the local area surrounding them, the local hospitals, local communities. So they took on a project to design a face mask, something that they would be able to give away to the public. And they came up with a concept, and they took that concept to production in 41 days, which is a very fast design cycle in my opinion. And one of the main tools that they used to do that was the Freeformer. And the Freeformer enabled them to very quickly create a ton of prototypes in different production materials. Not only did they test the prototypes, so for the mask, maybe they were testing different materials, they were testing different sizes, trying to validate whether or not they need 2 or 3 sizes for people's faces or 1 size is good enough. They use different materials to test different flexibilities. They tested the design. It's actually a 3-piece design. So they were able to test the rigid polypropylene bracket that goes around the flexible, which ended up being a silicone mask. One of the really cool pieces to this that I learned is that they were able to take a production material and use that to run the filter. And then they were able to take that prototype filter and go take it in and practice sonic welding. So they could set up the manufacturing process while they were finishing the prototyping. Just really impactful when it comes to utilizing your prototypes to help get your manufacturing process kicked off.
Sure. I mean, and how else might, because that's where I go is you're using the same materials. We know we can get high densities. We also know you can customize it. So let's say that customer does want to go from prototype to production. Is how close with the Freeformer, let's say it does go to an injection molding machine. I mean, are you the closest of a apple to apple comparison because you're using the same material? Is it because you're getting really good density? I mean, how close are people getting to that mass-produced product off of Freeformer? And you know, that little ecosystem. Just talk a little bit more about that shift and how it helps streamline it.
Absolutely. So I believe that number one, materials. If you're using the same material in your prototyping as you are in manufacturing, then first of all, you're in line, right? There's going to be no changes in the material, no surprises. Next, to your point, you need a part that is as close to a molded part, so it's got to have the right amount of density, right? You can't have that as you said, log cabin sort of feature with a lot of air gaps. So we do need a dense part. And we've done a handful of studies. We found that different materials do produce different results, but on the average, we'd say anywhere between 85 and 99% strength compared to molded parts.
Which again is because well, one is you're using the same material because that's where people might be prototyping in a 3D filament, which of course is not the commodity plastic, and it's not the commodity process.
So that's a good point that you just added. Is when companies make filaments, they're going to have to put in additives to help the machine run those filaments. And we're running meat material. There are no additives in that material. It's the same standard pellets. So there's really no additional chemicals you have to think about when you test it. 99% of strength is pretty good in my opinion.
Well, and I think and again, you compare it to the field and you're either not doing an apples to apples because the material is not the same, or let's say you can get a pretty close material, you're dealing with a manufacturing method that may not really recreate a injection molded part.
Moving on to some medical prototyping. So we're finding that we're quite successful on the medical side, mainly because medical materials, very hard to create a 3D printable mimic of a medical material. You really need to be honest.
They're pretty over-engineered to start with,
yeah,
so you know.
Yeah. So, so look, a couple of pieces of the Freeformer. I mean, number one, we can run your standard material, whether it's a basic medical grade EPS or whether it's something more complex. The other thing is some of those really specialty materials. We've tried some and we've had a lot of success. Bioresorbable materials for implants. We've had success printing those. We've had success implanting them. This is a great story from one of our customers, Soundplast, who, first of all, they're using it for standard medical prototyping. So just prototyping quick runs, and the quote they gave us was that it reduced the product development life cycle by 75%. They were going from 3 months using molding down to 2 to 3 weeks. And they were saying it's getting anywhere from 3 to 6 times faster to market. with the parts being very competitive.
Right.
So they also looked at doing some low volume patient-specific implants, and that's with the bioresorbable material. So on the medical side, it really opens a ton of new opportunity that your normal standard 3D printed.
Gotcha. So we've talked about robots. Now we've talked about the human body. So cyborg is somewhere in between, I'm assuming.
Terminator's going somewhere in there.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
So second to last is one of the more interesting stories I've seen. And this one was a little bit of a surprise to me because we print thermoplastic. I had no idea we could print drones. And this is a great story out of the UK. One of our customers is utilizing technology to 3D print medication pills. And they're using our larger system. They're using the 3 nozzles, and they're able to put down 2 different medications with essentially a thermoplastic dissolvable binder around. And what they're finding is that with the Freeformer, they are able to change the density, like we mentioned before, but that change in density changes the dissolving rate of the pill in the body. So they can customize the amount of medication a patient will get and how fast it will go. And that is groundbreaking to personalized medication.
I mean, it's just hard to, I mean, if you're in product or material development, like I said, we truly have gone from ingestible pills to robotic arms and things like that. I mean, I think for me, the easiest thing to wrap your head around it is, you know, you guys Arburg gives you this really blank kind of slate.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you all it's essentially like, here's your easel, right? And the blank canvas, but we're going to give you any tool necessary,
mm-hmm.
right? To make the exact art that you need to make, right? And so that's where I think that you have to wrap your head around the amount of flexibility. It requires tweaking, but you're also going from printing medicine to printing a plastic. So if you can, you know, if we can get that where you turn a dial, that's great. But I mean, the fact is you are doing it and it's working and people are going to clinical trials and things like that. I mean, it's just trying to think of, if you're in that development phase, I can't think of another mystery box that you could put your ideas into, give it the best parameters to succeed,
mm-hmm.
and then, you know, again, and if it's not that setting for that profile, you quickly iterate because it's additive and you go to the next one. And because of the way you built your machine, you purge the line, you try the next formulation, and then you're on your way. You know, it's just, it's so wide open. It's almost like you have to understand that as you get into it, it's what you want to make out of that machine within temperature ranges and size ranges and things like that. It's being produced.
Yeah, without a doubt. And to the medication, stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more from this, and I do think that this is going to be a way to the future when it comes to customizable medication.
Awesome.
So the last story I'll tell is all about production. So this is a customer of ours in Moscow, and they create these very large strapping systems where you would put a box in and they would wrap either metal or plastic strapping around for shipping.
Würth owns probably a couple of them, I'm sure.
I'm sure, yeah.
We've got a couple.
I'm pretty sure when Arburg corporate sends me boxes, it's got the strapping on it. It's probably the same guys. They bought a system because they were looking at different ways to streamline production. And they had read about what additive was doing for other companies. They wanted to see if they could implement it in their company. And they came to Arburg. They looked at the Freeformer. They identified over 100 production parts. Some were plastic, some were aluminum. And they worked with Arburg with a special type of nylon that they were able to substitute all of those parts for. And now they are delivering systems with over 100 Freeformer printed parts on them. But the real frosting on the cake here, which they didn't think about beforehand, and which they realized after, was when it comes to replacement parts and spare parts, for a lot of spare parts that they would be using as consumables, right? So straps are running through parts and they're going to wear out over time. They would have to go out to third-party companies and get those manufactured. And the lead times were a good 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And they realized they can print those in-house in 2 days and they can send to the customer.
Hmm.
And the quote from the customer was basically, we don't care where our parts come from, we just need them fast.
Hmm.
And 2 days beats 2 weeks. Anyway.
Well, and you think so it kind of goes back to what we talked about, where we're really trying to approach those oddball, that 5 to 15%. Chances are there's more than 100 production parts that go onto a large industrial wrapping machine, right? So really what it sounds like is they identified those 100 parts where they probably spent more time chasing them down than what they're actually worth. And they go, well, this doesn't make logical sense. It's not the part cost that I'm paying attention to. It's 100 parts on a giant machine or a very large machine. So that's not the issue. The issue is how do I make sure it's always on time? How do I have inventory control if I talk to that vendor once every 6 months or 12 months or whatever to get my minimum order quantity and things like that? Is do it for the stuff it's good at. Don't try to print 10,000 or 50,000 of it if it's not really the only way to make it. Is with additive is find the parts that create a business case and then build it around that.
Yeah, that's great.
And really, Jake, I appreciate the overview, and really this was to invite as much of a conversation as possible from the crowd. So as you see the chat function, we want to invite some questions because we just kind of opened up this wide world with the Freeformer platform. And so we want to take a couple questions from anybody out there. So we'll give it a minute or two, and then we'll circle back. One question that came in is, where can we see a Freeformer live?
So we have several units. In fact, right where myself and AJ are sitting here in Arburg's Rocky Hill, Connecticut facility, which is our U.S. headquarters. We've got 4 units going right now. Unfortunately, you can't see them. They're just behind the computer down on the demo system floor. So, of course, if you're in the Connecticut area, we would love to have you come in. One of the other things we've been doing is virtual demos. So if you're interested, we can send a virtual demo. We'll have an engineer get up close to the system, take you through the entire system, and if it makes sense, we'll be more than happy to print you a sample benchmark code as well. And of course, in the future, we'll be expanding that out as well. I believe we'll look to maybe this summer have a unit in the West facility.
No, absolutely. We're really excited to have that in Greenwood, Indiana. It's where our food lab is being built out. And no, it's same thing is be able to bring people in to go from front to back on the Freeformer is going to teach them about material science, the profile needed to take those materials through a 3D printing process, which with you guys, you get a bit of a heads up because you can utilize some of your injection molding knowledge beforehand. And so, no, we're excited to house the 300 here in Indy pretty soon. Very excited.
All right, keep those questions coming.
I got a couple questions here in the questions tab. So the first one would be, I see that there's a Würth 3D print team member in Phoenix, Arizona. How can I reach out and find out what they can do for me?
That's easy. I will give you Mr. Tyler Brown's email in particular. So if that person wants to reach out to myself or Vince Zabulski, we will make sure to get your local Phoenix rep attached to you. And actually, Tyler just went through his Arburg training.
That's right.
Literally today and yesterday. So we've got some, as well as the prep. So we should be ready to have that conversation with you.
Okay, so the next question is, what is the maximum size of part that could be now printed upon startup or change of pellets, resin, color? Do the extruders have to be cleaned or purged?
I love it.
Okay.
This person needs a follow-up. That's a lot of good questions.
Yeah, that's great. We can give you all the basic answers, but we would love to dive into more detail. It sounds like you've got some different thoughts on materials, coloring, and whatnot. So the largest bed size we have at the moment is about 9 inches wide, 9 inches tall, 5 inches in depth. When it comes to materials, we can run pretty much any thermoplastic materials. Coloring, usually what we're seeing is master batch coloring, but of course dyed pellets if you'd like to go that direction. The pellet hoppers do have active drying in there, so depending on the material you want to use and the dryness characteristics, you can dry material beforehand. hand and dump them in, and then also keep the pellets dry during print. What else did I miss there? Oh, material change. So we have a couple of options when it comes to material change. We can do a simple purge, where you're purging the material out and dumping new material in. Often we'll use a purging substrate, which for us, we just like to use polypropylene. It's simple, it's easy, it works great. So that's the quickest, easiest way. If you're dealing with a production situation, maybe you need to be 100% assured.
Medical grade.
Yeah, that's very true. Medical grade materials, 100% assured that there is absolutely no carryover from the previous material. There's 100% of the new material coming in. Generally, what we recommend, that's a very modular system. So you'll pop off that front nozzle, you'll pop out the screw, you'll clean the barrel. And usually I recommend, if you're switching materials often, have a second screw with you. That way you just pop in that clean screw, reassemble that front printing nozzle, and you're off to go. You're looking at probably a couple hours at the most.
And I would say is whoever asked that question, they asked some intelligent ones where they would be interested in, if you're used to the purge program of watching the Arburg machine switch materials and purge is definitely an experience, just because, you know, I think we're so used to, oh, it's you know, you purge a line or something in your FDM printer and you see the Lucas spaghetti come out and all that, but like to have 200 repetitions a second, pushing out that material to purge it through. One is you change the hertz and it can change pitch, so you make a little song, but it's if you're familiar with 3D printing and you haven't had a chance to put eyes on the Freeformer, you've got to look at it, because that 70 years of injection molding equipment, it's in that 3D printer, right? That engineering acumen, the experience, the idea that this thing needs to be making parts, a lot of parts for a very long time, that's directly in that equipment. When you look at how you built the system, just how rigid it is, and how easy it is to maintain for a machine that's built to really be a production machine. You know, it's treated as such, which is great.
All right, I hope we have all those points, but if you have any other questions, you can either grab myself or AJ's email there and shoot us a quick note. Sure.
I think with that, everybody, we really appreciate your time, and we will be following up in case there is any questions, but thanks again, and we look forward to the next time where we want to get into a little bit more about the economies of scale when choosing which part to go with. So thank you for your time today, and look forward to the next one.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.